Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Third Walk. I continued to learn while growing old. Solon frequently repeated this line in his old age. There is a sense in which I could also say it in mine, but what experience has made me acquire these past 20 years is a very sad bit of knowledge. Ignorance is still preferable. Adversity is undoubtedly a great teacher, but it charges dearly for its lessons, and the profit we draw from them is frequently not worth the price they have cost. Besides, before we have obtained all this learning by such tardy lessons, the occasion to use it passes. Youth is the time to study wisdom. Old age is the time to put it into practice. Experience always instructs, I admit, but it is profitable only for the time we have left to live. Is the moment when we have to die the time to learn how we should have lived? What benefit do I get from such late and painfully acquired insights concerning my fate and concerning other people's passions, whose work it is? By coming to know men better, I have only felt better the misery into which they have thrust me, and while this knowledge has shown me all their snares, it has not enabled me to avoid any. If only I had been able to preserve that stupid but pleasant trustfulness which made me the prey and plaything of my noisy friends for so many years, and kept me from having the least suspicion of all their plots, even though I was bound up in them. I was their dupe and victim, it is true, but I thought myself loved of them, and attributing to them as much friendship for me as they had inspired in me for them, my heart rejoiced. Those sweet illusions are destroyed. The sad truth that time and reason have unveiled to me by making me sense my misfortune has made me see that there was no remedy for it, and that all that was left was for me to resign myself to it. Thus all the experience proper to my age is useless for me now in this condition, and of no benefit for the future. We enter the list at our birth, we leave them at death. What use is it to learn to handle our chariot better when we are at the end of the race? There is nothing more to think about than except how we will get out of it. If there is any study still appropriate for an old man, it is solely to learn to die, and this is precisely what we study least at my age. At this point, we think of anything but that. All old men hang on to life more than children, and leave it with more reluctance than youngsters. That is because, all their toils having been for this very life, they see at its end that they have wasted their labors, all their cares, all their goods, all the fruits of their toilsome nights. They leave everything when they pass away. They have not dreamed of acquiring anything during their life that they might carry away at their death. I told myself all that when it was time to tell it to myself, and if I have not put my reflections to better use, it is not for lack of making them in time, or of having mulled them over thoroughly. Cast from childhood into the whirlwind of the world, I soon learned from experience that I was not made to live in it, and that in it I would never reach the state my heart felt a need for. Ceasing therefore to seek among men the happiness I felt incapable of finding in their presence, my ardent imagination readily jumped beyond the interval of my life which had barely begun as though from a terrain which was foreign to me, to settle down in a quiet resting place where I could anchor myself. This feeling, nourished by education, from the time of my childhood and reinforced during my whole life by this long web of miseries and misfortunes which has filled it, has at all times made me seek to know the nature and the destination of my being in a more interested and careful manner than I have found any other man seek to do. I have seen many who philosophized much more learnedly than I, but their philosophy was, so to speak, foreign to them. Wanting to be more knowledgeable than others, they studied the universe in order to know how it was ordered, just as they would have studied some machine they might have perceived through pure curiosity. They studied human nature to be able to speak knowingly about it, but not in order to know themselves. They toiled in order to instruct others, but not in order to enlighten themselves within. Several of them only wanted to do a book, any book, provided it was well received. When theirs was done and published, its argument no longer interested them in any way, unless it were to make others adopt it and to defend it in case it were attacked. But for the rest they drew nothing from it for their own use, and were not even concerned whether this argument were false or true, provided it was not refuted. As for me, when I desired to learn, it was in order to know and not in order to teach. I have always believed that before instructing others, it was necessary to begin by knowing enough for oneself. And of all the studies I have tried to undertake during my life in the midst of men, there is hardly any I could not just as well have undertaken alone on a desert island, to which I might have been confined for the rest of my days. What we ought to do depends a lot on what we ought to believe, and in everything which is not connected with the first needs of nature, our opinions are the rule of our actions. According to this principle, which has always been my own, I have sought frequently and for a long time to know the true end of my life in order to direct its use, and I soon became consoled about being so inept at skillfully handling myself in this world when I sensed that this end should not be sought in it. Born into a family in which morals and piety reigned, raised subsequently with tenderness in the home of a minister full of wisdom and religion, from the time of my most tender childhood, I have received principles, maxims, others would say prejudices, which have never completely deserted me. Given into my own keeping, while still a child, and enticed by caresses, seduced by vanity, lured by hope, forced by necessity, I became a Catholic. But I always remained a Christian, and soon won over by habit. My heart became sincerely attached to my new religion. The instructions and examples of Madame de Warens made me firmer in this attachment. The rural solitude in which I passed the flower of my youth, the study of good books to which I completely gave myself up, reinforced in her presence my natural disposition to affectionate feelings, and rendered me devout almost in the manner of Fenelon. Secluded meditation, the study of nature, and contemplation of the universe force a solitary person to lift himself up incessantly to the author of things, to search with tender concern for the purpose in everything he sees, and the cause of everything he feels. When my fate threw me back into the torrent of the world, I no longer found anything in it which could flatter my heart for a moment. Longing for my sweet leisure followed me everywhere, and made everything apt to lead to fortune or honors that could be found within my reach seem indifferent and disgusting. Uncertain in my anxious desires, I hoped for little, I obtained less. And in the very rays of prosperity, I felt that were I to obtain everything I thought I was seeking, I would in no way have found this happiness for which my heart was avid, but did not know how to recognize. Thus, everything contributed to detach my affections from this world, even before the misfortunes which were destined to alienate me from it completely. I reached the age of 40, wavering between indigence and good fortune, between wisdom and aberration, full of vices induced by habit, but without any bad propensity in my heart, living according to chance, without any principles determined by my reason, and inadvertent about my duties, without scorning them, yet often without being fully cognizant of them. From the time of my youth, I had set this age of 40 as the terminal point for my efforts to succeed, and as the one for all of my vain ambitions. I was fully resolved, once this stage was reached, that whatever situation I might be in, I would struggle no longer to get out of it, and would spend the remainder of my days living from day to day without ever again concerning myself about the future. The moment having come, I executed this plan without difficulty, and even though my fortune then seemed to want to take a turn for the better, I renounced it not only without regret, but with actual pleasure. In releasing myself from all those lures and vain hopes, I fully gave myself up to carelessness, and to the peace of mind which always constituted my most dominant pleasure, and most lasting propensity. I forsook the world and its pomp. I renounced all finery, no more sword, no more watch, no more white stockings, gilding, or headdress, a very simple wig, a good coarse cloth garment, and better than all that, I eradicated from my heart the cupidity and covetousness which give value to everything I was forsaking. I resigned the post I then held, for which I was in no way suited, and began to copy music at so much a page, an occupation which had always greatly appealed to me. I did not restrict my reform to external things. I felt that this reform was such as to require another of opinions, undoubtedly more painful but more necessary, and resolved not to do it twice. I undertook to submit my inner self to a severe examination which would regulate it for the rest of my life, just as I wanted to find it at my death. A great revolution which had just taken place in me, another moral world which was unveiling itself to my observation, men's insane judgments, whose absurdity I was beginning to feel, without yet foreseeing how much I would be victimized by them, the ever-growing need for some good besides literary vainglory, whose vapor had hardly touched me before I was already disgusted by it, the desire, in short, to follow for the rest of my course a less uncertain route than the one I had just spent the finest half on everything, forced me to this great review, for which I had long felt the need. I undertook it, therefore, and I neglected nothing within my power to carry the enterprise out well. It is from this epoch that I can date my complete renunciation of the world and this intense desire for solitude, which has not forsaken me since. The task I was undertaking could be carried out only in absolute seclusion. It required long and peaceful meditations that the tumult of society does not permit. This forced me to take up another way of life for a while, one in which I was subsequently so comfortable that, having since then interrupted it only when forced to, and for a short time, I have taken it up again wholeheartedly, and have restricted myself to it without difficulty whenever I could. Afterward, when men reduced me to living alone, I found that by sequestering me to make me miserable, they had done more for my happiness than I had ever been able to do. I gave myself up to the toil I had undertaken with a zeal proportionate both to the importance of the matter and to the need I felt I had of it. I was living then among modern philosophers who hardly resembled the ancient ones. Instead of removing my doubts and ending my irresolution, they had shaken all the certainty I thought I had concerning the things that were most important for me to know. Ardent missionaries of atheism and very imperious dogmatists, there was no way that they would, without anger, put up with anyone daring to think other than they did about any point whatever. I had often defended myself quite feebly, due to hatred for dispute and little talent for sustaining it, but I never adopted their dismal doctrine, and this resistance to such intolerant men, who had their own interest, moreover, was not the least of the causes which stirred up their animosity. They had not persuaded me, but they had troubled me. Their arguments had shaken me without having ever convinced me. I found no good reply to them, but I felt there must be one. I accused myself less of error than of ineptitude, and my heart replied to them better than my reason. Finally, I said to myself, will I let myself be tossed about eternally by the sophisms of better speakers, when I am not even sure that the opinions they preach, and are so eager to make others adopt, are really their own? The passions which govern their doctrines, and their interest in having this or that believed, make it impossible to penetrate what they themselves believe. Can one expect good faith among the leaders of a faction? Their philosophy is for others. I need one for me. Let me look for it with all my strength while there is still time, so that I will have a set rule of conduct for the rest of my days. Here I am in the full maturity of age, in all the strength of my understanding. I am already beginning to decline. If I continue to wait, I will no longer have the use of my strength for my delayed deliberation. My intellectual faculties will have lost some of their agility. I will do as well what I can do today in the best possible way. Let me seize this favorable moment. It is the epoch of my external and material reform. Let it also be that of my intellectual and moral reform. Let me settle my opinions and my principles once and for all, and let me be, for the remainder of my life, what I will have found I ought to be after having carefully thought it over. I carried out this project slowly and with various fresh starts, but with all the effort and all the attention of which I was capable. I felt intensely that the tranquillity of the remainder of my days and my total lot depended on it. At first I found myself in such a labyrinth of encumbrances, difficulties, objections, twistings, and darkness that 20 times, tempted to abandon everything, I was ready to renounce such a futile quest, and to abide by the rules of common prudence in my deliberations without seeking for anything more in principles. I had so much trouble unraveling, But this very prudence was so foreign to me, I felt myself so unlikely to acquire it, that to take it for my guide was nothing other than to want to seek across seas and storms without a rudder, or encompass an almost inaccessible lighthouse which pointed out no harbor for me. I persisted. For the first time in my life, I had courage, and to its success I owe having been able to endure the horrible fate which from that time began to envelop me without my having had the least suspicion of it. After the most ardent and sincere seeking that was perhaps ever been made by any mortal, I determined for my whole life all the sentiments important for me to have, and though I may have deceived myself in my conclusions, I am at least sure that my error cannot be imputed to me as a crime, for I made every effort to keep myself from it. To be sure, I have no doubt but what the prejudices of childhood and the secret wishes of my heart made the scale lean to the side the most consoling for me. It is difficult to keep ourselves from believing what we so ardently desire, and who can doubt that most men's interest in admitting or rejecting the judgments of the next life determines their faith, and does so according to their hope or fear? All of that could dazzle my judgment, I agree, but not alter my good faith, for I feared deceiving myself about anything. If everything depended on the use made of this life, it was important for me to know it so that I could at least turn it to the best account within my power while there was still time, and not be a complete dupe. But, given the way I felt myself disposed, what I had to dread most in the world was risking the eternal lot of my soul to enjoy the goods of this world, which have never appeared very worthwhile to me. I confess again that I did not always satisfactorily remove all these difficulties which had bothered me, and about which our philosophers had so often battered my ears. But resolved to settle once and for all these matters human intelligence has so little hold over, and finding impenetrable mysteries and insoluble objections on all sides, I adopted for each question the sentiment which seemed to me the best established by direct means, and the most believable in itself, without paying attention to objections I could not resolve, but which were refuted by other no less strong objections in the opposite system. A dogmatic tone about these matters is suitable only to charlatans, but it is important to have one's own feeling, and to choose it with all the maturity of judgment one can put into it. If we fall into error in spite of that, we could not justly suffer the penalty, since we would not be at fault. That is the unshakable principle which serves as the basis of my security.